Good morning, everyone. We'd like to get started this morning. I'm Margaret Hawkins. I am the director of the Records Management Services Division in the Office of the Chief Records Officer, and I'd like to welcome you here today. We have a great turnout for our Big Bucket workshop featuring the U.S. Patent Trademark Office. I think this turnout indicates a lot of interest in this very important topic. One of the things I wanted to do before we get started is just review a few logistics issues. I want to point out that this workshop is being recorded. We will be posting it on our Records Express blog in a week or so. It will be on, there will be a link to the video on YouTube. Also, there will be a few documents that will be linked as well that will be featured in the presentation. This will include the memo that the PTO used to send to their records coordinators about the inventory and a few other documents and the presentation slides. So that will be up in a week on Records Express. One of the things we'd like to do too is have everyone, since it's being recorded, hold your questions until the end. To be heard on the video, you will need a mic. We will have people coming up and down the sides, passing mics into the audience. If you could wait for your mic to ask your question, and the mics will already be on. No need to turn them on or do anything with that. So again, if you could hold your questions to the end so anyone seeing it on the video will have the benefit of hearing both the question and the answer. And also, if you could, when you ask your question, if you could state your name and your agency or company affiliation, that would be helpful too. Also, one of the things we'd like is your feedback on this type of workshop. It's a great turnout here, so we're thinking this may be the type of workshop that you all are interested in, but some feedback would be helpful. Also, if your own agency has a presentation on a topic that you would like to make, feel free to include that as well, or if you have suggestions for other topics, that would be helpful too. One of the things I wanted to point out was just this morning I learned from another person in the Office of the Chief Records Officer that at the Washington National Records Center, one of the staff members in my division was responsible for implementing the schedule that you'll hear about today. This is, I mean, you all know how big WNRC is, you know how many, the huge volume of records out there. PTO has a large volume out there. The person said that the schedule was just wonderful to implement, went completely smoothly through all the mass data changes and figuring everything out. That's one of the areas where the rubber really hits the road. It's both in the offices at the agency, but also taking care of all those records out at WNRC. To me, that's just an incredible testimonial to what you're about to hear today. So I think you've got some really, you've got a project that's actually gone into the implementation stage, which I think is very important. So I was very pleased to hear that. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Paul Wester. Paul is as most of you probably know, is the Chief Records Officer for the U.S. government, and he will be introducing our speakers today. Thank you.
So, good morning, everyone. A little more enthusiasm. Good morning, everyone. This is big buckets, you know. This is big stuff. First of all, I'd like to thank Maggie for that kind introduction and laying out the outline for what we're going to do today. I have just a few introductory remarks. First of all, I'm very excited to have the folks here from PTO to talk about the big bucket schedule and the implementation issues and all those sorts of things. And I think we're going to have a wonderful presentation and some back and forth with the audience. So I want to thank them, first of all, for coming out. Second of all, I wanted to say a few words about how this sort of activity relates to what we're trying to do within the records management program at the National Archives and across the government. From the three reasons why I get up in the morning to meet the business needs of federal agencies and records management, to protect the rights and interests of the government and its citizens, and to be able to identify and preserve and make available the permanently valuable records of our country. The kinds of things we're going to talk about today with Big Buckets kind of makes those three things happen. And so we're very excited to hear about this project and how it relates to records management and, more importantly, better records management across the government. As a lot of you know, we're in the midst of releasing a records management directive at the direction of the President of the United States around how to improve managing government records across our government and to kind of set out some markers for making government records management work more effectively, not just in the federal government, but in state and local governments and around the world. And the concepts within big bucket scheduling relate kind of centrally to that activity, where we've traditionally thought in very traditional analog 20th century kinds of ways about these issues. We now have tools like big bucket schedules and their implementation, which we think is going to help government manage its records and its information more effectively. And I think what we're going to hear about today is going to be one step in being able to make those sorts of connections. A couple of things I wanted to mention about the project that you're going to hear about today and why we're very excited about it. And Maggie alluded to some of it related to the implementation out at WNRC and the great work that PTO has done in documenting their records and documenting their permanent records so that we're able to make the transfers work more effectively into the National Archives. We're very excited about that. But we're also very excited about how this has helped PTO manage the records more effectively. Because of the efforts at PTO, they've been able to reduce by 70% the number of records dispositions that they have to manage within the records management shop, but more importantly across the agency, so that the folks who are in the agency that have to be able to consider records management as they're doing their work, they're able to have a tool that makes things work much more smoothly. So for that, you all are to be commended. Before I turn the program over to Susan and the rest of the panel, I wanted to have the whole crowd give a big round of applause to Kate Flaherty. Kate is a supervisor who works very closely with PTO and has been working with them for many years to get this schedule done and get it signed back in November of last year. And she's also instrumental in making sure that the program was announced and publicized, and most importantly, that I was on the 8 o'clock shuttle and here on time to do this part, and she's giving me the thumbs up, so I've done what I needed to do. So with that, I want to turn it over to Susan Fawcett, John Milligan, Neil Font, and Earl Ashley to talk about their project, and again, thank them for their willingness to come out and do this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and share this with you. This is going to be our story, and hopefully there's some things in here that can help you all as you go through your scheduling at your agencies. Okay, there's basically going to be 4 parts to the presentation. We're going to talk about the inception and the groundwork. Then we're going to talk about how we group the records into the series. And then we're going to talk about the Access database tool that we used. It really helped us to analyze the data. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we've implemented the schedules. And then, of course, we'll have the Q&A at the end. So, of course, before you start on a project, you should look to see where you're at to begin with. So some reflection helps. What we have at the PTO, what we had when we started, was a comprehensive record schedule. That's what we call the document that we present to the policies, the retention policies, to the agency staff. We have it organized by the hierarchy, the agency hierarchy, so we have different sections for different organizations. So the business areas can simply go to their business unit, look for their office or their top office, and then look and see what records we have scheduled there. We include both our unique agency schedules and the general record schedules in our comprehensive record schedule. Now, like most of you, we rely upon the business areas or the users to tell us when they have a new record. Of course, there are times when we stumble upon them and then we approach them, but for most part, we rely upon the business units to tell us. We use Microsoft Office 2010 right now. So that means Word, Excel, and Access. Those are the tools that we use. We don't really invest in anything too fancy for our scheduling. Now, when we started the project, which was back in '03, so it took a while to get this done. When we started, we didn't have media neutrality. We still had retention schedules published that were unique to the agency that would be absorbed into GRS 24 and 27, so we needed to clean that up. And we didn't have ERA, so we did the paper 115, so I'm going to reference SF 115 in my presentation. Now, our need arose from the fact that we had a lot of IT development. There were a lot of records coming along, a lot of IT systems coming up. We at PTO had about 120 IT systems, and of course at that time we were scheduling system by system. That was a lot to undertake. And then some of these systems were being developed so quickly that version 1.0 became version 2.0 before we even got through the appraisal of the first one. So all of a sudden there were new series within the systems themselves. They were taking on new records. So we really just couldn't keep up. And we really needed to eliminate the scheduling of the IT systems, in part because we found ourselves being kind of redundant on some parts and then not really being able to capture the real essence of the records that were inside the systems if we were so focused on the system itself. Now, at this time, which was in around 2003, the federal enterprise architecture was around. I don't know how many of you might have worked in the government at that time, but there was a lot of effort going towards making the government more business-like. And so we created lines of business or business reference models at agencies that cut to the core of the business mission and the business function. So we focused on that, and we came up with 5 functional business areas, which we used to create our 5 buckets. Obviously, we're the Patent and Trademark Office, so you're going to see records associated with granting of patents. You're going to see them associated with the registration of trademarks. But also, part of our mission is to disseminate information. So there's actually a 3rd core function at the Patent and Trademark Office, and that's to disseminate. In order to grant patents and register trademarks, there needs to be information from previous trademark registrations and previous patent grants. So we had a dissemination function. And then we found out the rest of the stuff was sort of administrative, and we broke that into 2 parts. We have the administrative sort of short-term, temporary type stuff that would typically fall into the general record schedule, but it didn't. It was a little bit more unique to the agency. So we kind of thought that would be a good functional area. And then, of course, we have the high-level function. The undersecretary of our office makes decisions that become permanent, that affect the way the United States does its business in the intellectual property community. So we came up with the intellectual property, or IP, program policy bucket. So that's how we came out. And of course, every agency has something different, but that's where we got ours from. Now, I can't stress enough the idea of buy-in, because we all struggle every day to make sure everyone knows how important the work is that we do and what the impacts are. And a lot of us work in offices where there's turnover. But you really need to get some buy-in. I have to say that I was very lucky in the fact that the office that I worked in when we started this was we were in the data management group. And the director of the data management group was Holly Higgins, and she was very passionate about records management. So it didn't take too much convincing for me to get her on board and for her to recognize the situation. We prepared a briefing for the USPTO's executives so that they would know what the resource levels would be, tell them why there was a need for this, and just generally give them information. I was always trained early in my career, no surprises. You want to let your bosses and your higher-ups know what's coming. Now, we informed the general counsel, who of course is an agency executive, but if you don't have a good working relationship with the attorneys at your agency, this is probably a good time to get one together, because I've recognized that attorneys and IT storage folks really are on your side. They're part of the cause. They want you to be compliant. They want you to only maintain what you need to maintain. And so the council is a good place to also get some buy-in. Now, we did a formal MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with Archives for this, and that was signed in 2003. And one of the important aspects of that is that we had an open-ended completion date. Like I said, we didn't have any additional funding and no additional resources, and so it was really important for us to not be under the gun to try to get something done quickly. So we had an open-ended, and this was new, so we weren't really sure how long it might take, so that was very helpful. And finally, we did announce to our records coordinators in the business areas what we were doing. A lot of these folks, and you might find this in your agency too, a lot of these folks, records management might be a collateral duty, so they've got a lot on their plate, and it can be easier for them to be responsive to you if they are brought into the project early on. So we conducted a records inventory. Always a daunting task if you're doing a whole agency, but we did what we could. We assembled a kit. It was a half-inch binder, but it also had a CD for folks who liked electronic versus paper, so we had both of the media there. And we had definitions of what a federal record was, some preliminary information of what to expect when someone comes to inventory, a copy of the inventory, questions and such, so they could reference that. We set up meetings with the business areas to inform them, and then, of course, during the inventory, we discovered some of the record series were obsolete and some were new. Now, our record series were done more recently, about 1996, where a lot of them were done. And we have to thank former NARA employee Larry Baum for that, because he really set up a really good schedule for us to start with. We had weekly meetings with our team. That was really important for me because we spent about 1/8 of our time on this project, and sometimes weeks were coming by and I had so many other projects or so many other things I was working on. I knew that Wednesday at 10 o'clock I was going to focus at least 2 hours that week on this project to keep it going. NARA appraisal staff could visit because they always knew Wednesday at 10 o'clock we'd have a meeting, so if they could pop in, they could, so that helped. And we could track our to-do list. We knew what we were working on. We could keep the momentum up. If we had to backtrack or go back over some stuff, it gave us that chance. Now, we did hold quarterly meetings with our appraisal archivist at NARA, and we would often bring in the business subject matter experts, and I would be there and we could talk over some of the more specific details of certain record series or retentions, and it really helped to keep the communication going. Now, the access database was important because that helped us track what we were doing. Now, we had our schedule. I mentioned the comprehensive record schedule. We had all that data sitting in an access database, so what we did was we basically enhanced that access database to take on the inventory and help us with reporting so that we could analyze the data. So that was basically the groundwork that we set up before we started actually doing the series. I'm going to turn it over to John Milligan, who actually led the inventory work, and he toiled for hours over the data as we were grouping it into the bucket. So, John, you want to come on up?
I'm John Milligan. I'm a contractor, Milligan and Associates. I've been at the Patent and Trademark Office for about 9 years now, supporting Neil and Susan. And it's been an interesting project. The patent at the Patent and Trademark with the big buckets. We had a lot of great support from around the agency there. And the next slide basically kind of shows this whole process flow for the big buckets, or the bucket project, and it all precipitated from the records inventory. We identified the 42 business areas. There are about 42 business areas, and we tried to build the aggregation of business records, the buckets around these 42 business areas, and we approximately had about 200 meetings back and forth. There was through this flow, you can see a lot of back and forth between the records inventory and the database. And as Susan said, we had kits that were set up with the current schedules and some background information, feedback sheets, deadlines for them to submit to us. We had a lot of follow-up. There were new records that were ID'd and current ones were kept or deleted, and then we had to go back and forth through this whole process to do what's called an annotative narrative and crosswalks, and it was a back and forth process. My advice is to get a big table when you're doing markups and use a lot of chocolates. That helped smooth things. Even though the database was really good, the big table and the chocolates really helps. So, but this whole process, as you can see, is the CRS database kind of managed the whole thing, the inputs from the inventory, a lot of the new metadata that we created that was related to the inventory, so we could parse the old and take the new and create the new buckets and sub-buckets and build it around the workflow process. The buckets evolved into sub-buckets, and we ended up like about 127 buckets, sub-buckets, categorization. So it's kind of granular, but we needed to get that to make them somewhat relevant. We developed the narratives that became part of the SF-115 eventually for each bucket schedule. We kind of synthesized the narrative based on the old buckets or the old record schedules, and we crosswalked to ensure the legacy schedules were accounted for, and we assisted the internal analysis, included legacy in the new series. We tried to do that validation as we went along, and we broke it down from permanent to temporary, and the policy and the exam, pre-exam administration. There was kind of like a little sequence in each office. So basically, even though there was a lot of sub-buckets, each business area would probably have from 2 to 6 choices at the end of the day. So it was related to the function and the retention, and it was around the business process. That's the key, to identify your business process. And to do that, just as a side note, make sure you find somebody in the business area that knows the strategic overall, but still is cognizant of how the records are managed and created at the ground, or as Maggie would say, where the rubber meets the road. Get that key middle person who can develop a good relationship with, so you can talk with the legal people, or have them talk with their legal people and the other business area people, and also talk, of course, to the systems development people, because the money is coming from the business areas. It's not coming from IT. It's certainly not coming from records management, and legal is always there too, but they don't have money either. So get that key business person. It's the Goldilocks principle. Don't aim too high, don't aim too low. Just get that person who really knows the business area. But after getting the input from him and focusing in on that key business person and his associates, we sorted and grouped and prepared the SF-115 materials and sent to the records coordinators and then to the business executives. We had drop dead deadlines. I didn't want to be so morbid, but no response was equivalent to approval of the schedule. We got very good response all the way around. We had the granularity in there, but we began the inventory of subsequent bucket while the appraisal was going on for the prior one. So we started out with the simplest ones were the agency administration and the dissemination bucket. Those are like 2005, 2000, and then we started the trademark bucket after that. And that trademark was probably the easiest one, because their functions were very, very well defined. We saved the patent and IP buckets for a little later on, because I think the law was still kind of unsettled. We have the American Vents Act, so we were kind of like deferring that to a little later on. And the key was trying to come up with the verbiage, the narrative that was the name of the Word document that would be the core of the new SF-115. We summarized and synthesized the new series in a kind of an umbrella description that reflected the business process, but it was not so specific as to preclude future additions. And we always anticipated there would probably be new laws coming down the line, and that we needed to have a fairly flexible structure, so we could drop new record types into the sub-bucket, sub-bucket, and so we wouldn't have to create new SF-115s and minimize the load for our appraisal archivist there. And so we established an outline of the new series that were based on the functions and the context in the retention period, and had about 2 to 6 options that people could choose from for each business area. Was sorted from long-term to short-term, and we dropped the existing legacy and new series into the sub-buckets, and the annotative narrative was later stripped of the annotations. And this is kind of like what really kind of helped us visualize it a little better. It was an annotative narrative at the top, which was basically what would be the SF-115, and that was the umbrella description of this record series. Down below, we have the legacy series, the annotated old series that helped the business areas and the NERA appraisal archivist and us visualize the new bucket, and what was the old, what was the new, what was missing, and helped us keep the focus and guide us through the various permutations in evolving the buckets. The bucket crosswalk was another feature that was somewhat similar to the annotated narrative. It sorted identically to a narrative data added to facilitate analysis. It was more column-like Excel spreadsheet, and it would group the new and existing legacy retentions together and map the old series to new, and sometimes the old retentions and the ownership and official of the official record copy was in there too, and it included the existing office of record and tracked notes in a column form. And this is a kind of an example here where you have the sub-bucket for the trademark case file feeder records and related indexes. And some of the, on the third from the right, you have the, probably can't see it too well, but it's the current series title. We had global correspondent updates, published trademarks, and then on the far right was the Office of Record, so we could kind of track back and see, well, if we could find out who our contacts were in the trademark law offices, so we can kind of do the back and forth negotiations that this project required. And the records ownership, this is the whole records ownership flow into the new buckets, so it really kind of helped things to generate the annotated narrative in the crosswalk. The next slide, this is the before, and back in 2001, 2002, we were scratching our heads and go, how are we going to make this thing sensible? Because you can't read it now. You can't even read it when you can see it, and much less the business area is reading it. So we decided we have to parse this out a little bit better, and the buckets project was a good way to do that. What we essentially did, the first two were A and Bs. You can't see that, but those are basically very well set up for GRS 24 and 27. Oh, the tickers schedule, the trademark image capture and retrieval systems. It's the whole big system for the trademark, the registrations that are processed and published every year. I think they do about 100,000 a year or something like that. But the meat of the ticker system is, well, the GRSs are the first two, and then the last couple are GRS 24 or GRS 20. But the real meat of it is the key business area content and aggregate was like C, D, and E and F. So we kind of parsed those out, and that was really the core of the trademark case file and the feeder records that go into the case file. So the next slide, we have how we kind of parse this out. The legacy electronic subparts were accounted for in the new buckets. We crosswalked all these from the old to the new, and you see the new N1s that were created in 2006, 241-06. So the key was to keep this media neutral. We wanted to make them all media neutral because we didn't know everything was going digital. I think after 2002, the agency set the official case file for trademarks and patents as electronic. So we had to get to some sort of media neutrality. We add these new N1s over here in C, D, and E. We add these to a electronic system matrix as needed each year for the data call. and Tenera on the automated information systems. We have about 120, 130. And it's also used internally by the USPTO Enterprise Architecture Tracking System, so the systems development people and the business area people, liaisons, know what records are in what system. And we have an electronic content tracking system, too, that helps with that process and makes it easier to implement the schedules. Afterwards, the tickers, so you got this big monstrosity before, and this was the after. And it came, and so it's much simpler. And we basically broke the tickers into like 2 sub-buckets. That's a little easier to use. So, and the first part is the select case files that are permanent, and we keep them for 6 years before we turn them over to the National Archives. The ticker schedule after these are the feeder records, and we developed what's called the feeder record concept, and that we felt would allow flexibility for future electronic systems and scheduling. It's well suited for case files. So if you all have any types of case files, think about the feeder record concept. So all of these were basically records that were coming into and out of the case file. The case file is permanent, but the feeder records you probably don't need to keep beyond a certain period of time. That was well set up for our processes at the Patent and Trademark Office. And it really helps because, well, that's the whole core of the Patent and Trademark Office and is the case files that are granted every year. I think we do about 300,000, 200,000 patents are granted every year and 100,000 trademarks, I think. So, but basically, the whole thing was centered. Oops, I'm getting ahead of. Oops, hang on, let me go to try this. But basically, this whole thing was controlled by the CRS database. The ins and outs, the negotiating back and forth, and a lot of iterations, a lot of the markups. The real core and crux was getting a database, a tool to use. You may not all have an Access database, a wonderful one like we had, and a guru of a database expert like Neil Font here. But you know, use what you can with what you have where you are. That whole Teddy Roosevelt saying. So. To look more under the hood now, I'd like to introduce you to Neil Font. He's our database guru that will show you under the hood a little bit more on how the database worked and how it really assisted us in all aspects of the project. Oops.
Well, thank you, John, for the kind words. You can see with his smooth voice and compliments and the chocolates, it goes a long way towards peace with your coworkers and bosses, right? My name is Neil Font, and I've been supporting Susan, technical support for Office of Records Management since 2002. So it's been quite a while. And my role was to capture the data and to provide tools as we're going along through the bucketing process to help with reporting and capturing vital data as we went along. First thing, people might say, why do you use Access? To tell you where we've come from, back in the 90s, I should say before Susan arrived, the record schedules of PTO were held in a Word document. And shortly after Susan arrived, she said, this has got to change. And it was an excruciating process a couple years before I arrived, which was moving those record schedules, copying and pasting one by one into a database. But since they've been there, we've been through multiple versions of Access, starting with 2000, 2003, 2007, and it's really served us very well. Database benefits, we maintain the live and the legacy records together in one central repository. We were able to, as John and Susan mentioned, as we went along, we were able to add extra attributes. So essentially, the database grew from its initial purpose, which was to disseminate the record schedule, to tracking inventory data and contacts and people and the status of the scheduling process as we went along. Also, traditionally, it's been used to track the organizations at USPTO. And every few years, it seems, we get notification, oftentimes short, before we publish a CRS. PTO, the CIO is reorganizing. And of course, we've got all our record schedules tied to, in the database to the organizations. So we use the database to move the organizations around, assign them to different areas, and move record schedules. So Access really helps with that. And I couldn't imagine doing something like that in Microsoft Word. We've already mentioned the USPTO record schedules. They're published in Adobe PDF pretty much with a click. And very important too, we have all the data in our tables, but we also have forms that allow us to query and pretty much ad hoc any organization, any bucket schedule. You just click and generate a report. Okay, just to give you an idea of the structure of the database, and we're keeping it kind of simple, these are the two primary tables that we use to maintain our data. There's a CRS Live table, which has the traditional fields that everyone here is accustomed to. Citation, series title, series contents, disposition, and addenda, which was another field that we added that we'll get to in the future. That was to accommodate extra data that we'd gleaned from our buckets. The HiSort Live table contains the organizational data, and primary fields are the HiSort 3 and the organization. And we'll move to the next slide and take a look at that data. The organization in the middle you can see, and let's see if this clicker works. There we go. So we've got our organizations right there. Those are the names. And we've got a numerical value assigned to each on the left-hand side. And this is used as a hierarchy to essentially a unique identifier, which will actually change when the organization moves to a different location, but it shows the parent-child relationship of the organizations. Up at the top, you can see Chief Financial Officer. It's one of the big orgs, one of the eight umbrella organizations at PTO. And underneath it, you can see 171, 172, so on, indication that these are child organizations that belong to the parent. Some extra fields in there that are used to generate the CRS, the title page attribute. If it's checked, then that becomes part of our formatted CRS document and creates a nice, neat little title page automatically. Once again, one click. And another parent-child relationship column, which was used with another application that we use, which allowed us to essentially drag and drop organizations and all of their associated schedules to their new location. Okay, and here is a close-up of the CRS Live table, and it's essentially a one-to-many relationship with the HiSort 3 and the org. The organization goes to the series title, so the series title, traditional record series, retentions, citation exist in the CRS Live table. Here's an example of the what we call the switchboard form, and this contains essentially all of the data in CRS Live, in addition to some of the fields that we used to track the inventories. The key ones were, key fields were the deleted, the checkboxes, which, I jumped ahead one. Okay, we go, if a record series was deleted, then we would just check an attribute. If it was absorbed into a bucket, then we would just check that attribute right there. And it helped greatly to get rid of a lot of the record series that were not necessary anymore after inventories. We find that out and just check them off as deleted. And when they were absorbed, legacy series were absorbed into buckets, we would check them off as absorbed. Up at the top, we have parameter controls to query by pretty much anything you want. And down at the bottom is the actual data. Okay. And we also developed a means to edit the organizational data and the switchboard all at once by creation of new forms. So it really helped out. Initially when we started, we would make a lot of the changes in the table, but the form has developed to really give us a great way of querying and updating data all in one place. Okay, and we've, from the chart at the beginning, the little process diagram, you would remember the crosswalk. And the crosswalk was generated from the CRS, and it contains all the data, really, the legacy data that has been assigned to the new bucket data. So you can see, whoa, okay, there we go. Let's get back there. Okay. We can see the primary bucket right up at the top right there. So this is the new bucket, and below the description. And on the left-hand side is scheduling initiative sub-buckets. And on the right-hand side were the legacy citations record series and the organization as well. So it was fantastic to see it all in one place, and it really is kind of like an aha moment when you would look at all of the data together, new and old, and very good way of displaying it. Okay, I mentioned the filtering capability of the forums, and you can take a look up top, and this is an example of querying by bucket. So we had all our buckets in lookup table, and we'd query and isolate just those records that we were interested in seeing. Okay, and also that's an example right there. It's a little blurry, this one, but query by org. So pretty much all of these controls up top were used to query and drill down on the records of interest. Okay, and this is an example of our CRS comprehensive record schedule, which used to be published in Word, but now we've found that it goes excellently to PDF. So this is all generated from the Access database. Click a button and it shoots out. Okay, and that pretty much wraps up the database portion of it, and so I'm going to hand it back to Susan here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil. And I have to say, Neil was really great when we were analyzing the data. I kept saying, can you tell me how many 2-year temporary ones do we have, or can you run a report? So he was constantly creating ways to run a report so that we could analyze the data outside of the database. So really appreciate all the work he did on that. So to implement the schedules, basically, and I think we're still going through this, we have to determine how to display it. And we have the comprehensive record schedule where when we first did the first couple of, when we got the SF-115s back and we had new series, new schedules, we basically just kind of put it in the same document that we had before. And it worked okay. We would just put it in the same section. But later we realized that we really needed to have the 115 as part of the comprehensive record schedule document, because we recognized that if you're going to use the idea of a grouping of series and you're going to add new record types there, you need to have that description, that overall umbrella description, that bucket description, to know where does that fall. And so now we have, as appendices, we've added this year, and last year too, the 115, a copy of the 115. So that helps a lot. Now we have to find out how the schedules are being used by the offices. And of course, you have different levels of folks who understand records. Some folks have just been asked to find something out, so they may not be as knowledgeable. And then you might have folks who you've been working with for 10 or 15 years. So there's a different variation on the use. Some offices like to go to the traditional record series. They like to look for it in their organization, and if they don't find it, they give us a call and say, hey, I have this record, I don't see it on here, can you help us? And of course we help them. But there's been cases where some folks have gone to the SF-115, to the buckets, and they've analyzed it, and they think they know which one it fits in. And that's when they call me and they say, you know what, we have a new record series, I think it's this one. So that's been really great. It's helped them to make that choice, and I think it's working. And I think over the next few years, we'll try to cultivate that in our records coordinators. One of the things that I suggest, and we've become more aware of, is that when you do a bucket, you're kind of doing a broad range. You're saying it's this type of record that has this type of function, and it's very broad. And our record schedules, when we present them to the agency staff, they may have a term for it that's not a keyword in the bucket description. And so you might need to add some data, and that's part of our addenda field where we add the data, the keywords, because people keyword search now. That's how they find a lot of things. So that's something important. So we have to produce a searchable PDF this year. Our schedules are going to be posted to our intranet site using a searchable PDF. Now, we do have Word versions of that we maintain in our office, so that if we need to cut and paste or create sort of a review document or present some information in that format, we can do that, but we maintain the integrity of the schedule in a PDF for the agency for the staff to get to. Now, I was talking about how we're implementing it. We have the comprehensive record schedules. I keep mentioning, I think you've got that word down now, right, CRS? This is a simplified entry. This is one of the buckets that's sort of just got one record type in there, although there's different types. There's different records that would go in there, but pretty much everyone understands this. So we have the program policy and subject files, and we just have the citation, the disposition, the title, the contents, everything you would see in a schedule. Now we have one that has addenda. We call this derived because we derived it from that annotated narrative. When John was walking you through early on, he showed you how we had a main heading, a grouping, a bucket title, and then we had the current, or what we were calling at the time legacy, because we needed to separate the current from the new. So the legacy N1 job numbers down below. And we found out that really it helps in the cases where there's several record types within a bucket to display it to our staff in that manner. So we derived that from our annotated narrative, and of course when a new one comes along, we add it to that list, so it becomes part of the addenda. So in this case, I guess if you could see, we do have the listing, and some of these have 2 or 3 or 4, but some might have 7 or 8, just depends. And then when a series becomes obsolete, we can take it away from there. And of course, all this information is managed within that Access database. Okay, I guess there were a couple things I wanted to say as a recap. Focus on your groundwork. You have an idea of where you are, but really take a look at where you are, because you're so close to it, you may not be looking at just everything that's going to impact you when you take on this project, or if you choose to take on a project like this. Low or no-cost methodology is great. Using existing resources is great, and with some of your budgets this year, that might be the only way to do it, but don't let that worry you, because if you just expect that it's going to take some time, you can still use the resources that you have and just get moving on it. If you wait around till that money comes in, you may never get the project going. Talk to your executives or get that buy-in from the start. It's an opportunity also to raise awareness for records management, so always take that opportunity. Base your structure on your functions when you can. And that's somewhat obvious, but sometimes you don't think about it that way, because you know this is this record, this is this record, this is this record. But sometimes when you look at those, you say, but you know what, all those records are used for this. So you have to sit down and kind of analyze it. We churned and we churned. And sometimes we stopped, threw it out, and started over again. So try to get the function, try to get it based on function, because typically your function won't go away. Your media types will go away, the name of the database will go away, even the record name will go away, that type of record, that series will go away, but the function will usually stay. So try to get it based on that. You won't have as much work to do in the future. Inventory as much as possible. In our case, there were times when we knew that the record series that we had were really pretty good because maybe we had just scheduled it 2 years before, or we knew that there was a certain business area that was really up to date on their schedules and they would have told us. So we knew that maybe they didn't need as much of attention as some of the other business areas, and so we could try to target it. So try to do as much as you can. Now, we, of course, used Microsoft Access because that's on our suite. That's on our desktops. We have access to Access. But I know folks have used Excel, and that can be a pretty good tool. You don't have to invest too much. Again, we adjusted, reviewed, repeated, and came as close as we could to perfect. We used a memo, as Kate had mentioned, and that's going to go up on the website. Oh, thank you. We used a memo, and that helps to be more formal. Now, of course, you can attach that memo to an email to make things easier. I don't think I've seen a memo come around for a long time on my desk. But that helps to make it more official. That helps to make people understand that it's something they should pay attention to. And of course, you work closely with your appraisal archivist because this is what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to gain an appraisal and you're trying to gain an approval. And so you want to work closely as you can. Let's see. The annotated narrative I found very useful because you could really just take a look. As much as the Access database could churn the data around, you know as much as I do that scheduling can be an art more than it is a science. And so you really kind of need to look at it, see how it looks, get an idea for it, and that annotated narrative really helped. When you're talking about retentions, I think you should use both your 115 and whatever presentation document you provide. Now, maybe you just provide the 115s to your agency, but in our case, we had a separate document, and so we used them both to see how it would work. And I think we're learning a lot about scheduling and how people use the record schedules in their daily work. Now, we did have a reduction, as was said earlier, about 70%. We had about 414 when we started unique N1 jobs, and we went down to 127. So we felt that that was good. Now, it did take us several years, depending on how you factor it. It could be 5, it could be 7. But it took a lot of time. But you know what? It was worth every minute of that. And even though it took a long time, we got a really good product in the end. It really simplified life because we've done these schedules. We did 5 schedules, 5 buckets, and I haven't submitted a new one in a couple years. So I haven't had to do any extra work. I know Kate hasn't had to do any extra work on her end. We've had, I'm thinking 4 or 5 new record types come up that we've become aware of since the last bucket was done. And we've been able to drop them or place them into one of the buckets. And so, that comes out in the end that people can apply the schedules right away. You don't have to wait around. You can give someone that retention almost right away. So that has been a really great outcome, not to mention the simplicity and the less work that we have to do. When a new IT system comes up or when they change the name of it, we have to do a little tracking, but we don't have to submit anything new. So it's really quite wonderful. Identify all your functions prior to scheduling. We always like the feeder record concept. Focus on the core permanent record, the core of what that IT system's doing, and then look at everything else sort of as an input or an output. Our scheduling differed from bucket to bucket, and that was partly because we learned as we went along. What we were doing in 03 wasn't what we were doing in 2007. Some things were the same. We still had the annotated narrative. We still had the crosswalk that we developed. We still kind of went out and talked to business areas, looked at the inventory, used the CRS, the Access database. But records are different in different business areas. You might not be able to group them as closely because there might be a legal reason. They might have 10 records, and there are 10 different specific retentions on those based on the, the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. You can't do anything about that. So you have to take it as it comes and look at each one slightly different. Finding the correct business contact to verify and validate is an ongoing task. So you just resign yourself to the fact that a lot of work might need to be done on finding the right person and maintaining that relationship and getting those people to respond to you. But just don't give up. Keep trying and just recognize that that's going to be part of the workload. And of course, I mentioned before the addenda field. That helped us reduce the number of lines that we had in our document, where we could just have one record series that listed, this 5 or 6 or 7 different record series that were grouped in to that bucket series. Now, that's about all I have to say about the project. It was really fun. It took a long time, but it was a great, and it simplified my life greatly. If you all have, I know we're going to do the Q&A here in a minute, but if you have any other questions, I've put my contact information up here, my email address, the phone number, and I'm also listed on the NARA website under the records officer's contact list there too. But I really appreciate you all coming out, and I appreciate the opportunity that the National Archives has given us to share our story and our experience, and I hope that it serves you in some capacity. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Ramsor. I'm with the Department of Education. And one question I had was in regards to your database and how you're going to use it going forward because of the implementation of ERA. How does that affect how you're going to use your database and your scheduling for the future?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is it good? Yeah, I think we're going to continue to use the database because it's just become such a foundational tool. What we are going to have to do, of course, is probably have a gap to bridge that difference, because we're not really going to be able to feed into ERA. We're not going to be able to connect the two systems. So it'll probably add another step to preparing the 115. And it's an important question that you asked, because our schedules didn't go into ERA. We did SF 115. So you're right. That's something that maybe the next person who takes on a bucket scheduling can come up with a good way to manage that.
Okay. And if I may, I think that what we probably do going forward is generate any information that we may need from Access in a report and attach it into ERA.
Like load it up as
Right.
an attachment.
Yeah,
for part of
yeah,
that.
we can just generate a report via Access, save it to a shared drive, and do an attachment into ERA.
Yeah, that might be our solution.
Yeah.
But thanks for pointing that out. We should write that on our list of things that we need to work on.
Should also mention that there's a lot of extraneous information that's very useful for us to contain in the database. For instance, contacts. So we got a people table in there that allows us to tie an individual to an organization or to a record series. So that's also very valuable to hold on to as well.
Thank you.
My name is Paula LaRich. I'm also at Education, and I have 2 questions. One, is this presentation available for download somewhere? Because I would very much like to see this. And the second question is, how did you account for email?
Well, we consider email to be part of the media neutral concept. And so if you have a retention for a directive, let's say, and that directive happened to be communicated through an email, then it would fall into the same bucket as a directive that perhaps was done in Word or is on paper. So we did not delineate or put any kind of media or medium tag to it. So
Okay.
it would be all inclusive. The hope is that it will cover even anything new that comes out, something that we're not even using today.
Right.
So we're hoping that it will have that longevity to it. To answer your first question about the download, I think Kate can probably speak to that.
Yes, it's going to be available on YouTube. There'll be a post on Records Express in about a week or so, and a link to the video.
And also on the, if you go back to one of the slides, it calls it, that Ticker's electronic system that has a line item in there way at the bottom for email. And we parse that out to GRS-20. But basically, it's kind of a feeder record into the case file. If there's something that happens to be in that email that needs to go into that case file, and it happens to be email, it's considered a feeder record. And we didn't include in any of the GRS's, general record schedules, would apply in that same manner. It could be a feeder record, but we did not line item delineate that out in the annotated. But it is there in the database too. We track all of those in the database.
My name is Anna Dornbos, and I'm with Bureau of Prisons. And I had a couple of questions. One, how much were they using the schedule before you implemented the new one? And the second one was, how did you deal with brand new record series that didn't already have a legacy? Because it seemed, as I couldn't tell from the presentation, if anything was brand new, because everything seemed to have some sort of a legacy. So I was wondering if you had anything that was new and how you handled that.
Right.
But we did find about 85 new ones. Going through this whole iteration process of the inventory, we came up with about new series that were incorporated into the sub buckets, and they were added as in the addenda part. We just added them to the descriptive bucket that was most appropriate for it, with function and retention. And so we came up with about 85 new ones.
Right, and the example that we gave you of the bucket had a list of N1s on it, but if we had an example, which we don't, of a bucket that had a new one, what we did is at the bottom we'd have like N1, 241, 96-1, in the line and line and line, and then we would have new. We would have basically the title, record series A, and then on the right side, instead of the job number of the existing schedule, we would write new on our annotated narrative, and then in the crosswalk, it would say new, and it would not have a legacy citation. And that actually did help by making that notation, because when the appraisal archivist could go through, they could really highlight, okay, what are these new ones? And then, if they needed to, they could take a closer look at the new ones maybe than the ones that they'd already scheduled, because perhaps knowing that they'd already scheduled it, it had already been through appraisal at one point, and they could focus on the other time. So that's what we did. We basically added it as an annotation, and we put it in the crosswalk. And as to how many folks used it before and after, it would be really hard for me to say. I think that we have a pretty good core group of users, and they adopted it pretty easily. I don't know if I could hazard a guess on how many used it before or after. We've never really tracked that.
We do have an electronic compliance tracking system we're starting to use with all the business areas, and from firsthand experience, going back and forth with talking with the systems development people and the business area people, presenting which options for their retentions of the records in the systems, it really has helped quite a bit. We don't have to give them this big monstrosity that you saw on one of the screens back there, but we can give them the simple, cut to the chase. What does this record type do? And then we can add that down the road to the addenda on the series for their next go around, and they can track that and put their metadata tags around that record type in their system, and then that way they can start tracking it. They're probably already tracking it right now, but they just add a few metadata tags, and that would really help them. But the schedule, the bucket schedules really, I think, have helped quite a bit in that, and it will in the future.
Right. I think what John's really stating is that when you work with the IT department or the developer and they need to find out a requirement, they kind of want to know the gist of it. So by having the buckets and having everything simplified, instead of having to figure out if there's 400, which of the 414 of these is the one I'm dealing with. We only have 127, and it's broken down by business areas, so you end up saying, which of these 30 maybe am I dealing with? And you can just tell them very quickly, and you can give them a quick answer for their system development requirements. And so with that said, I think that we might not have had as many developers using the retentions prior to this, but now we do have developers using it. And so in that case, we have had sort of a group of folks who are now using it who may not have been able to use it before, or were not as readily able to use it as before. I think there's a mic.
Okay.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I have a quick question about the a follow-up about implementation with email. For the large data warehouses or large email warehouses you may have looking down the road, how are you going to implement the retentions and the buckets against those large, massive email servers that we all have sitting out there, and looking forward to pulling that stuff out and extracting it out, like for the permanent record series?
Right. Well, we don't have anything formal in the works right now, but my hope is to be able to approach it by looking at the owner of the email. So that would typically not be the IT department. The owner of the email would be the business area. So I would like to focus on the business areas and find a way for the IT department to provide the business areas a method of managing that email in accordance with the schedules that we have.
And one of the things we really try to emphasize in all our meetings with the systems people and the business area people is to get them talking about their records and the ownership responsibility. So if their record happens to be in an email or on a stone tablet, whatever it is, it has to be managed in some way. But I think one of the key records management principles is ownership, and making sure that they know that their necks are on the line, the business area, if something happens to their email or their record, and to get the controls in place according to 36 CFR 1236 or whatever it is, and to make sure that those are in place and they're cognizant of it. They're cognizant, and once it's an eye opener to them, once they know that they're responsible, not just some IT person down the way, they'll hopefully step up, and I think they have. I think they get that conversation started between the business area and the developers, and we can chime in, give them the schedule, simplified form, and bring in legal whenever we can too.
We do try, at least we've been trying lately, to try to show or explain our role and our services the way that perhaps IT security is done. Business areas who own records or use IT systems don't need to know everything there is to know about IT security. When a system's developed, those IT security functionalities are put into place. So my goal is to try to influence, the agency to look at it that way, so that records management services and functionality is provided into the systems, and that the business area can therefore have that service from the IT department. But we'll see how that works out.
And in all our meetings, we try to demonstrate that key records management skill, I think, is the ability to be politely insistent. So, and that's you got to kind of feel your way through a lot of these meetings, but to be politely insistent and say, and make them cognizant of their ownership responsibilities.
Greg Schildmeyer from ATF up here, and I think you're kind of touching on it, but in the disposition scheduling, of course, you're looking at the back end of the life cycle, and you talked about the media neutrality. In your working with the business units, did you kind of focus on the current records and file plans and gathering records together and making one record regardless of what the media was, and then relate that to your big bucket at the end?
We track the media, what it was in now, but we didn't make it dependent on that. Is that you're referring to? I mean, we if it was in a CD or if it was in a system or if it was in a paper file, down the hallway, we did track that.
We did track that, and that was kept in the database. We had notes fields and a media field, and we indicated what media it was, had been kept in a legacy manner. However, to keep the media neutrality of the current bucket schedules, it wasn't mentioned there. So for our own purposes, Susan would like to know, is this record kept in paper, is it electronic, in a database backup, whatever? We have that, but it's not disseminated via the schedules.
Right, so does that answer directly?
Well, not exactly. One of the things we're trying to do with our program is to emphasize that the record is the record regardless of what the media is. So
Right.
we're trying to establish file codes. We're trying to establish a subject file classification. Well, ATF has a subject file classification system. So if you have a criminal investigation, it may consist of computerized information, spreadsheets, videos, a lot of things. But it is one record series. It is one record classification, regardless of what comprises it. So what we're trying to do is establish that file code and then tie that to a disposition at the end. So we're emphasizing file plans to users.
Right, and I think we've kind of used our comprehensive record schedule as a sort of a file plan because we put them, they're the records that belong to an office or an organization. But we definitely created schedules that did not depend on the media. So we had the same idea. If you have a patent case file, you have a patent case file. If it's from 1800 or the year 2005, it's patent case file. So, and that's kind of where we start and stop. So when you're talking about retention of the case file, just talking about pure retention, how long to retain it, it kind of starts and stops there. Now, of course, we all know we have more work to do on the other end because we have to help people store it. We have to help people maintain it. We have to help people. So we do have to have some knowledge of that. But strictly speaking, as just the scheduling point, we saw no need to have the media, just like you said. 10 years from now, it's going to be something else. Sometimes you have the hybrid where you have the pieces together. Sometimes it's pure paper. We just don't know, and so the schedule needs to speak to the record, like you said. So I think you're on the same line we were on what we need to do.
And our big bucket, we have all our buckets, we have 127 sub-buckets and sub-buckets. And it's pretty well set up. We could probably do an enterprise file plan down the road for everybody. But right now, that's not probably talking about anything like that, but we give them some sort of a breakdown, maybe on the 2 or 3 or 4 choices, and they can set up their own file plan, and just as long as they get the metadata tags parsed to the file, from the file plan parsed to the proper records retention schedule. So it's kind of an informal. We leave it up to the business areas, but the bucket schedules are in sub-buckets. They're pretty well set up. You could probably do it pretty easily. So that's probably a to-be project if we decide to do an enterprise one.
Yeah, hi, Bruce Bailey, Department of Education. You've got a very nice, hard-won project. A lot of years. Can we expect from you, I don't know if you're going to answer, or Nara, that we could use your project narrative and format as a template to fast-track other agencies into a big bucket scenario?
Yeah, I think so. I think we would, if you just want to contact me, in my information up there in my email, we can certainly give you, we don't want anyone to reinvent the wheel, I'm sorry, Kate. Oh, okay. Good idea. Okay, I'll get that. And but anyway, so please do contact me. Let me put that back up real quick.
Yes. Hi. I'm Peter Held. I'm with the Federal Aviation Administration. I wanted to see if I understood you correctly when you said that email. Your current philosophy appears to be you regard email, or you classify email depending on which big bucket, which of those 5 big buckets it falls under, and then that determines the retention. That kind of implies that someone would have to make that determination ahead of time. I don't know how that would work in practice when you have a lot of email coming in, and is that, do you expect the user to do that classification, or?
Yeah, to be honest, we would expect the user to make that classification the way they would of
If they
any
were
record
following
that they
and so forth.
create or maintain. The hope is that we, somewhere we will be able to automate that perhaps in some fashion. And I think we're all struggling with that same issue right now. But I do think that we need to keep that philosophy. That's my philosophy, is that we need to keep that retention, that ownership and that
I would
retention, that
agree.
maintenance.
That is
Now
the-
the application of that, as I know, is very,
Right.
very
That
difficult.
becomes an implementation issue, but the philosophy, I think, is sound myself.
Yeah.
In a lot of the business areas that have the processes well in place, like the patent examination process and the trademark examination process, and some of the legal ones too, they have a pretty good process where they're capturing those, and it's going into the feeder records, and it's eventually going into the case file. So it's and a lot of the business areas, they don't have that well-established process for the email. So it's a matter of trying to work with them to get the process in place, but it's basically dependent on the business area trying to determine that process.
Right. The other question I had was about the file plan, the corporate file plan. You already alluded a little bit to that. Is that a work in progress, or?
Well, like I said, we don't have more of the formal file plan, so we don't have anything that's like one-to-one, a numbering one-to-one. But what we use is we basically use our comprehensive record schedule in lieu of an enterprise file plan. There are offices that will go into, we'll create the file plan for them, where, we kind of target certain offices, or they come and ask us for a request, and we'll help them build an office file plan. But for the most part, we sort of use our comprehensive record schedule as the file plan, because we have it built by organization and then the types of records, alphabetically under that organization. So it sets up something to that effect.
Yeah, the potential, of course, one great advantage of big buckets, of course, is that you can build a corporate or enterprise file plan very naturally out of it, and then you'll build down your hierarchy. But I suppose that is a work in progress.
Right. We're always learning best ways to use it and how to
Neat
implement it.
project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a question. Paula Billett, CBP, part of DHS. How did you factor in the GRS? I know the big bucket is probably for your mission records, but as we're inventorying CBP and we are building file plans, everyone is interested in the GRS, or the General Record Schedule, that is specific to their office, so they don't have to use the 27 schedules and bear it through. How did you I know you had administrative records. You mentioned you had segmented in two parts.
Right.
Is that how
No.
you did it?
Right. Well, we do have we pepper into our comprehensive record schedule items that are general record schedule citations. So we do have line items of those records in there. The most common ones that folks use, we put in a separate section, and I have to say thank you to my predecessor, Kathy Schultz, who actually created the short-term administrative record section of the CRS, which is still going strong. And basically, that's where we put a lot of the GRS items that are common to most offices. And so we separated them out. But there are some offices, when we go to talk to them or we do the inventory, and it's a major part, there might be a GRS citation that's a major part of their business area, we will put it in there. For instance, if we're in the general law office, it's the FOIA office, we put the FOIA citations into that part of the comprehensive record schedule for the legal office, because that's the one that they use the most. So, so it's kind of, we look to see what might make the most sense, and we try to balance it.
That may be another to-do project, because the buckets are set up so we could parse probably some of them fairly easily down the road into the buckets, the GRSs into the buckets, or sub-bucket that's appropriate for their retention. But that's kind of like one-to-one negotiation between the business areas, and if it works for them, a bucket, you know, we could, and we put that line item addendum for the GRS under in the bucket citation and the comprehensive record schedule. So that's something to be done that was kind of like a bridge too far, I think, for us to go there. We were trying to focus on the N1s, and that's, yeah, I think we were focusing on that.
Good morning. My name is Rich Wajuda. I'm with the Department of the Army. In this process, to what extent did you find yourself changing dispositions, and how did that work? Did you find any problems with the business owners in getting that done? Are there any lessons learned here in this area?
For the dispositions, I'm trying to think.
Well, we did have a couple of back and forths, you know. We had a couple for the, yeah, they were like Office of Enrollment and Discipline. I think we went back and forth a couple of times on 30-year, 60-year, and, you know, but the other business areas, almost all the other business areas, we had to basically kind of go back and forth, and they finally agreed to the schedule that worked for them, and we just wanted to make sure a schedule worked for them and they were comfortable with it legally as well as operationally.
Did you find yourself lengthening schedules, or did you shorten any, or?
We shortened a few, but they probably weren't that great of a reduction. Like, for instance, there might have been one that was 10 years and we got it to 7, you know. Sometimes we would use, a lot of that would be the administrative, we would use examples from the general record schedule, and we'd say, well, your record is a lot like this one, and you have 10 years, but, you know, there's 7 is what the general record schedule has, and, you know, we're not going to come take them away from you at year 7, so, you know, if you need them for some reason longer, you know, that's okay too, but if you're okay and you're fairly comfortable with 7, can we go from 10 to 7? So we kind of did that kind of negotiation. Several of our retentions, you know, are based in, you know, a legal need. And so, you know, we had to recognize that we couldn't get those any less. And there were a couple cases where we looked at it and we're like, gosh, why is it that long? In the business area, you know, they were scratching their head because they're like, gosh, none of us were here when that was first done. And I went back and looked at some old schedules and I said, wow, it used to be even longer than that. And does anyone know? And it was like, well, that was back in the 60s. So was anyone around? No. So, you know, there were some really good conversations, and some folks were really, you know, quite intrigued with that idea of where it came from. And, but in a couple cases where that happened, they went back and they thought it out really carefully, and to be honest with you, it ended up right where it was when it started. So, you know, we did our due diligence. We looked at it, and that's where it landed. So,
actually, we did lengthen a couple. We had for the patent bucket. We did well. Actually, when we were doing some research back on the patent case files, we realized back in the 70s they had a 50-year permanent retention, and for like the last 20 years before we did this, they had evolved into 40-year retention. So we were scratching our head, well, why did they change that? What was the context on they changed that? But actually, in revisiting, and we did have a new retention requirement for the evidentiary patent case files, which is 50 years, and the lawyers needed that. That was something that, you know, the legal area demanded.
Yeah, and I think that, as you know, that changes. So, you know, there were cases where we had existing schedules that had a 5-year retention, and we went back to talk to them, and it had been 5 years since they had come up with the new series, and they realized that 5 years wasn't long enough at all because of, you know, X, Y, and Z. All these things had happened as they began to use the records, and so they recognized their business need necessitated a longer retention. So, you know, it was really one of those office by office, series by series, and maybe part of the reason why it took 7 years, you know. So, thank you.
I just wanted to point out a couple things about the GRS since that was mentioned. Today or tomorrow there will be an RM communication coming out to everyone who's on the list that will be announcing a series of a couple of webinars on a tool we developed to help people apply GRS 20 with electronic records and media neutrality. As you all probably know, it's rather painful to work through, and until it's revised, we wanted to help people with that. Also, we have been having a series of webinars on the proposed restructuring of the GRS. I don't know if any of you attended any of those. The last one for agencies is either tomorrow or Thursday. I can't remember which date. I don't know if anybody here is signed up and remembers. It's in the morning. Thursday. Okay, so Thursday morning. And that, all the information on that also went out in RM Communication and is on our website. So if you haven't signed up for that last one, you can. Also, in the fall, we will have coming out a guidance product on bucketing GRS items, so both in terms of working with your own bucket schedule and as we move forward into revising the GRS, what you might be doing in the interim. So there'll be a guidance product coming out in the fall on that. And also our October bridge meeting, which is, I believe, October 17th. I don't think the RM Communications has come out yet on that, but it is October, mid-October. We will be having, one of our speakers will be the NAR employee who is the supervisor for the GRS team, who is leading all the restructuring of the GRS. We're going to have an update on that, sort of what came out of all the focus groups on the restructuring. Also, there's going to be an update on the social media chapter, which I know is highly anticipated, and other GRS things. So read Records Express, read your RM Communications. There'll be a lot more coming out about the GRS because we realize that is very important to people since it's used throughout the government and covers many, many records. So I just wanted to put a plug in for all that. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Oh.
Hi, I'm Rich Noel. I'm with NARA.
You look familiar.
I just was thinking that wasn't your task, not that it was an easy task, but wasn't your task made somewhat easier by the fact that I think you don't have field offices, and you're all headquarters, and you are a very focused agency with a very focused mission. So I think it's your model maybe a little harder for really big agencies like I work with the military to use.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. It wasn't until a month or two ago that we had any kind of satellite office. We just opened a Detroit office, so we've always been focused basically in one location. Although we are part of the Department of Commerce, we took this on just as our agency. So it was focused simply on the patent and trademark office records. Also helping us out is that we had a really good schedule in place already for a lot of our records. And like you said, we're small. I can't hazard a guess at how many folks we have, like under 15,000 or something like that. So we are a small agency. So I think you're right to point that out, because it would come into play, like if you're going to take on a project, and it's going to be large scale, you're going to have to probably make a big project management attack of that, or break it down into smaller units, I think, or have manage it in a different way than we did, because we did have that sort of maybe an easier time than some of the departments would. Definitely, Department of Defense. We're no Department of Defense.
We could go right down the hallway or the street, to track down the records liaisons.
Yeah, we know the people in the hall, like, hey, so, it is, there's something different to that.
Everything's done virtual now. I mean, they have all these Skype and everything, so maybe you could have, virtual meetings or something.
I should add, there were a few organizations that were a little, I should say laggard maybe, and really the upper level buy-in and the memo that was sent out from high up gave them a little bit of pressure to comply and meet with us. Not the usual, can we meet with you? And it got extended to 2 weeks, a month down the time. So we got very good response because of the upper level buy-in. They
Yeah, that
eat
might be,
it,
that's
so you will.
probably why I mentioned that we, something more formal, because we typically don't need to be so formal, yeah, with a memo. Mhm.
Any other questions?
Miss.
Yep.
Oh, there's one.
Here you go.
Thank you. Regina Martin, Social Security. And on the GRS, I guess you said that you incorporated some of the GRS into, I don't know, that bucket that's called
Yeah, our agency
agency
administrators.
admin. But do they still use some of the other GRS as well?
Right, right. What we've done is our buckets, although we relied upon some of the general record schedules to create similar unique agency record schedules, we did not take on rescheduling anything in the general record schedule. So if you go to our, our HR section, you might find something unique to the Patent and Trademark Office as a bucket schedule in there, but you will find, the GRS schedules for, personnel case file, all that. So we do use the general record schedules, and we try to use them as much as we can. I mean, we love our unique agency schedules, but gosh, if you have a good GRS, we always try to apply that first before we go to the agency.
Yeah, and then you said, actually, I have 3 or 4 questions.
Sure, no,
But,
we're here.
you said that, I guess the big buckets are broken down by function, but then you also have them broken down by organization. So you have like the organization and the functions and the organization and the functions, and you keep going.
Right, and
like
that's where that sort of art comes into play, because you can say, well, gosh, granting a patent is a function, but the patent business area does that function. And so there's sometimes when that's a parallel, and then sometimes maybe you have administrative records of the legal office, or administrative records that deal with finance, and administrative records that might deal with the a board of patent appeals. And those may not be covered by general record schedule, but they're all sort of administrative records, and there's that function that's similar. But we chose at that point to then make it about that office, and it sort of repeats itself. So, if I was to go back and look at it again today, maybe I'd tweak that a little, or maybe that doesn't work that way. But for us, we tried to create the function, and then create the buckets by function, and in several cases it ended up being by office. So the patent and the trademark buckets actually are equal to a business area as well as a function, but our IP program and policy probably covers 6 different business areas. It's not just one, so that one is different than the other 2. So, like I said, each
And we had
bucket's sort
a
of
dissemination bucket too, which kind of did a lot of crossover, because the patent business area has a lot of dissemination functions that ended up in the dissemination bucket. Trademarks, and then of course the director's office, the undersecretary. So if it was a core publication, it was in part of the dissemination bucket. So yeah, there was a lot of crossover, especially in the dissemination bucket.
And I think it could have worked, kind of either way. Sometimes we were like, well, gosh, it could work either way. Pick one, kind of.
Yeah, we're working on buckets, and what I find is usually, a lot of times, one record could potentially fit in like 3 different buckets.
Right, and that's why I said we turned it, and then sometimes we tossed it and started over again, because it was like.
And then you said you had 414 unique down to 127. Was that record schedules or record series?
Those were
N1s.
N1 job numbers.
Okay.
So
So
I mean,
actual
some of them,
schedules.
yeah, so it would be N1, 2, 4, 1, 9, 6, 11,
Schedules.
2, or something, so it was each.
Oh, it was.
Each item, it was each item.
Okay, so it was within one, it was different series within the record schedule.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And last question, and I'm a little confused on this. You talked about your database, and it was a central repository. And at first I took that to mean that the records get put in that database and they're managed, but I think you meant it was a database as a central repository for all things records management, as far as your comprehensive record schedules, et cetera?
Right, it's a database with data in it, so it's a, what is that, metadata database?
Data.
Database.
Everything we need to do our jobs all in one master repository.
Maybe one of these days.
Okay.
Thank you.
How long did it take you to develop this database, roughly?
Oh my gosh, the database was actually, I came on in 2000, and it was actually there already. And you wanted to, Kathy's in the Paradox. Okay, Kathy was my predecessor. She's right there. So we have some historical knowledge here. So apparently it was Paradox from the 90s. I guess you probably created it when you were working with Larry. Is that right? So it's been a work in progress since over 15 years, maybe. How is that? You know?
I meant the comprehensive record schedule content and structuring the database. That was quite interesting to listen to the presentation here on the data. So thinking it must have taken you some time and effort to build that.
Right. I think it's been a work in progress over about 15 years. But if we look at what we had in 2002, I mean, I'm not sure how if you want to speak towards maybe some more specific build information.
Yeah, I'd say the most time-consuming was getting the data into the database. So as soon as all the record schedules were parsed out into the database in the different fields, it was good, very easy, and then it was kind of evolving over the months and years. As we would introduce new features or new data to Susan and John, they would say, how about this? I would like to get this kind of report, this kind of query.
Yeah, sure.
And just it would grow, and if I had the time and Susan said do it, then I would do it and add new features as we went along. So if you actually, what I described were the few primary tables and a few forms. There were a lot of other little things, a lot of other forms, and oftentimes we would try something and say, no, we don't like that. We don't like that report. We don't like that form. We don't like that view. We like the traditional. So things got weeded out as we went along. So I must say there was never really a project management approach to developing the database. It was something that was always there, and it evolved as we went along. And these guys were pretty good as far as, you know, making suggestions, the best group, because they're the users, they know the data.
I like the visualization aspects of it. And you made
Yeah, but I'd say if you actually had your data set up in a somewhat structured place right now, to actually move the data into the database and get some queries and forms would probably take you a couple of months if you're doing from scratch.
And I do want to say that that it's been really helpful on this project to have folks who are, you know, really well knowledgeable and well versed in records management, and to have a technical support person available to support, because it really works. The two work well off of each other.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Earl has been picking up a lot of the slack too when Neil hasn't been around, and Earl's been learning all the ins and outs and has become a key part of the project in maintaining and implementing the database, especially in terms of the comprehensive record schedule and any inventory data. So he's been a godsend.
It was all done when I got here. It was all done before I got here.
No.
And he's humble too.
You've helped quite a bit. Awesome.
Any other questions? Going. Oh.
Oh, here we go, right here.
This is a problem with any schedule, but some of your buckets have selection criteria, like I think for the trademarks.
Yes.
How do you monitor that to see if anybody's making the right selections?
You know, that's a good point. Right now, we have a very close working relationship with the managers of the records of the database. So we go and we check and we say, okay, well, what's retiring? What can we do? And they run queries. We have a system that can run a query. What we did when we built this, we want to automate it totally at one point in our next new system, the next new trademark system. But right now, what we did was the selection criteria was based in part on, what's the word, a key word. So let's say it's a duration period, then we would be able to do the formula and the system would be able to pull the records up due to that, that criteria plus the duration. We also have, let's say we have to do the federal trademarks, and there is a code in the system that denotes, it's already there, it denotes what a federal trademark, so there's already a tag in the system. So what we tried to do is create selection criteria that matched the coding and the tagging of the system so that we can get the system to run the queries off the tag. So we say, okay, well, if it's no longer live and it's got tag F or whatever the tag is, and it's been plus 6 years, then that needs to go. So we kind of created it so it would be like a formula that would run in the system. So we really were thinking of how does this get automated, and that's going to be an aspect of the next generation of trademark systems that are coming up. We're going to
that's another one of the requirements with the business areas to make sure that that's built in, because a lot of that's mandated by law too, I think, on its selection criteria. And so as long as they know to build that into the next generation, and that they have to try to do what they can with what they have now to meet that compliance, that's the big thing, and get the procedures in place that show that they're trying to do that.
But that really helped us. We wanted to be able to implement it, not just create criteria that sits on a 2D piece of paper. But
Are you all going to adopt an RMA? Is that your goal?
It's out of our...
At this point, no. We always have a goal towards that, but we don't have any plans right now for an RMA. What we do have is we're working very closely with the 3 major development projects going on right now for the patent system, the trademark system, and our financial systems. Those are the big projects that are going on right now, and so we're really focusing right now on getting the requirements into those systems, and the systems themselves, because they're so big, are going to be their own RMA. Now, we might build something on the back end to either hold it or transfer it, or I don't know, we might even, decide to use a third-party storage,
one of the keys,
FRC.
One of the keys is, I think, doing the spade work. I'm from Iowa originally, so I think before you toss the seeds out there and throw an RMA or a tool at it, I think you need to do the spade work up front in the business area, so those seeds will take. That's the big thing, and that's why this project was so good, to establish those relationships with the business areas, to kind of start doing that spade work and get people to thinking about what they have to do, and then whatever system you put in there, they'll be ready for it, and they'll know what you're talking about, and how to maybe manage their records within any type of an open system or a closed system.
Thank you.
And John brought up mentioned the spreadsheet that's disseminated to all the AIS owners. And so when system development comes up, they're aware of our record schedule. Someone might, we are kind of choking them a little bit. We're going to apply a little bit of pressure, but it's much more visible. The record schedules are much more visible now than they have ever been to the developers of the AISs. And so we're compliance, a little gentle compliance.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you brought up a good point. When you do create a new system, and it sounds like your IT department does all the time, and it appears to fit under one of your functional schedules, big bucket items, do you just put it in there, or do you also let NARA know that you have this new system so that perhaps we can
We have an automated information system, AIS matrix, that we have to comply with you guys every year. So we kind of put the line item on the bucket schedule, the N1, that we have existing if it's associated with the 120 automated information system. So yeah, we track that, and we have internally we have an enterprise architecture. Gears, it's called, system where all the systems people can see their little N1 line item or GRS or whatever it may be, if that system is tracking that, and so yeah, we do try to account for that.
Yeah, so when we submit the how many IT systems have you scheduled report. It comes to NARA that way, but we also update our comprehensive record schedule every year and submit a new version to the National Archives, so it's also submitted in that format too.
Okay, so that would also include hard copy documents such as stone tablets.
That's right. Yeah, if we know about them, we'll put them on there.
I think one of our most interesting didn't we have a Virginia ham or something like an artifact? We track artifacts.
Oh.
I think one of the law judges.
Well, those aren't records, though.
Yeah, no,
They're not records.
but nobody. One of the plaintiffs had a Virginia ham in there. They brought it in, and they just left it behind. Yeah, and so I think they ate it up. I think. So they ate the evidence.
But you get those questions. You get those odd questions like, "Well, gosh, is this ours? Is this not ours? Is that a record? No, it's not. It's an artifact, but it's not a record. The ham is not a record." No, I don't know. That might be folklore. I'm not sure.
Any other questions? Okay, well, please join me in thanking our presenters again. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.